When I was camping deep in the Alaskan wilderness, my own son abandoned me like I was nothing. He walked away cold as ice, left me with no food, no gear, and said, "Goodbye, Dad. Go introduce yourself to the grizzlies." In his mind, either hunger or a bear's claws would finish me off, clearing the way him to get his inheritance. But when he finally strolled back home, I was already there waiting, smiling. "I have a little surprise for you," I told him, and believe me, he never expected what came next. But before I get there, let me remind you, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss the rest of these stories. The front door crashed open so suddenly it shook the hinges. Ethan stormed inside, hoodie damp from that constant Portland drizzle, sneakers squeaking across my hardwood floor. "Dad, I need $6,000. Right now." I froze at my desk, pen in my hand, still poised over the invoices I had been reviewing. The sharpness in his tone felt like a slap across the face. He was not asking, he was demanding. "Ethan, what?" I asked, but he cut me off. "$5,000, tonight." He stalked across the living room, his fists tightening at his sides. "I just sent you your allowance last week," I reminded him. "The 4,000 barely covers rent," he snapped, his voice cracking with anger. "You think that's enough? You think that takes care of everything?" My old flannel shirt suddenly felt too tight on my shoulders. My hands were still greasy from working on Mrs. Lopez's transmission that morning. These auto shops, every single one of them, I had built from nothing. 18-hour days after Eleanor passed away, every ounce of strength I had went into keeping things afloat. I sacrificed everything to give him chances I never got. "Son, we have talked about this," I said. "You need steady work." "Work?" Ethan spun, face bright red. "Why should I work when you sit on piles of money? When you control every dime like some dictator?" The word hit me like a punch. I stood straighter, old military training straightening my spine. "I am trying to teach you responsibility." "Responsibility?" He let out a bitter laugh. "You want to hear about responsibility? The second you die, I will take over the shops. I will run them better than you ever did." The words spread through the room like poison. My chest seized at the way he spoke of my death, calm, calculating. This wasn't frustration or grief spilling out of him. This was Glosson. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. 2 decades of single parenting, all the sacrifices, all the hope that he might become the man his mother would have been proud of, crumbled in a single instant. He must have seen the shock in my eyes. Worse, his face shifted, realizing he had said too much. Then he spun for the door and slammed it so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. The family photo on the mantel rattled. Eleanor's smile wavered behind the glass. I stood still, watching it settle, unable to move. The silence pressed in on me. Outside, Ethan's engine roared and faded into the night. I stayed at my desk, gripping the pen with white knuckles, staring at that photo trembling in its frame. The next morning, I reached up and straightened the picture. Eleanor's face smiled back at me, young, glowing, holding 8-year-old Ethan at a little league game. The memory struck like a blow to the chest. I thought back to Eleanor's funeral. Ethan in his oversized suit, clutching my hand while I fought to stay standing. At that time, the mortgage on the first shop was already 3 months late. Her medical bills had drained us dry. I made her a promise with her last breath that I would take care of him, that I would give him everything she no longer could. By Thursday, I found myself digging out the old photo albums. Each page was a reminder of another sacrifice I had made. Ethan's private school, $35,000 a year because Eleanor wanted him to have better than public schools. The University of Washington, complete with the dorm life he insisted on. The Honda Civic I handed him at graduation, $20,000 cash because he refused anything used. I ran my fingers over a picture from his 16th birthday. Even back then, there was an emptiness in his eyes. While his friends worked summer jobs, Ethan gamed all night, living off the allowance I called an investment in his future. Looking at those photos, I saw the pattern. Every bailout, every handout, every failure I rescued him from had chipped away at his character. I thought I was raising him right. Instead, I had built a stranger, a young man who looked at my death as nothing more than a business opportunity. Saturday night, I sat in Eleanor's chair, the one I never could bring myself to get rid of. I could almost hear her voice. She would have seen this coming. She would have pushed him out into the world, forced him to earn his way. "I failed you," I whispered into the empty room. The truth settled heavy like winter frost on my bones. For 22 years, I had been trying to buy Ethan's love, trying to fill the hole his mother left behind. Each check I wrote was not for him. It was to cover my own guilt, my own sense that I wasn't enough. I lied to myself, saying that providing was the same as parenting. Sunday morning, I slid the photo albums back on the shelf and sat at my desk. My hands trembled as I picked up a pen and paper. Old military disciplines steadied my breath. It was time to start thinking clearly, to plan for the possibilities I had never wanted to face. The blank sheet of paper on my desk seemed to stare me down, daring me to make choices I wasn't ready to face. One ring, then two. My pen hovered over the stack of legal documents I had been drafting when the phone shattered the silence. Ethan's name lit up the screen. I hesitated, then picked up. "Hello, son." "Dad, hey, how are you doing?" His voice was coated with a cheerfulness that was too bright, too practiced. It sounded more like a salesman's pitch than a genuine question. "I'm fine," I said slowly. "This is unexpected, considering what went down last week." "Yeah, about that. I've been thinking. I was way out of line, and I want to make things right." The words tumbled out fast, rehearsed, like he had been practicing them in the mirror. "Actually," he added, "I've got an idea, something that could fix everything between us." I kept silent, letting my military discipline do the work. "Sometimes silence tells you more than words. Let's go camping, Dad. Alaska, Wrangell St. Elias National Park, just you and me, like when I was a kid, remember?" The suggestion hit me like a whip. Ethan hadn't cared about the outdoors since high school. "This is sudden," I said. I know, but listen, my buddy bailed on me last minute, and I've got these tickets just sitting here. Flights, permits, gear, everything's already covered. The package expires tomorrow if we don't use it." My grip on the phone tightened. The timing felt too neat, too convenient, like it was designed to push me into a corner. "Ethan," I asked carefully, "since when do you organize camping trips?" "Come on, Dad. Remember when you taught me how to track animals? When you showed me how to light a fire even with wet wood? You always said the wilderness reveals a man's true character." The memories cut deep. Those had been the good years, before Eleanor passed, before I started trying to solve everything with money instead of time. "This could be our chance," Ethan pressed, his voice softening, "to remember what we used to have. Just father and son in the great outdoors. No noise, no stress, no city distractions." I shut my eyes. Hope pulled one way, instinct pulled the other. Every rational thought in me screamed that this was staged, but behind the suspicion sat something heavier, the fear of missing a real chance to mend what was broken. "The flights leave April 26th, Ethan said quickly. "Portland to Fairbanks, then we drive north into the park. 5 days in the wild, like old times." "5 days," I repeated under my breath. "Dad, please. The tickets are already burning. This might be the only chance we have to fix this." The silence stretched so long I could hear my own breathing. My eyes drifted back to the papers on my desk, the legal safeguards I had been writing, plans I prayed would never be necessary. And yet, "All right," I finally said. "Let's do it." "You mean it? That's great." His excitement burst through the phone. "I'll text you the details. Meet me at Portland Tacoma, departure gate. This is going to be amazing, Dad. You'll see." The line went dead. I set the phone down gently, though my hand trembled. Outside, the endless Portland drizzle traced patterns across the window pane. I looked back at the stack of documents, then at the pen in my hand. Hope and caution. They both felt like betrayal. 3 days later, I slid the legal papers into the inner pocket of my travel bag. They felt heavier than paper should, weighted with unspoken fears. At the airport, Ethan was already at gate B14, bouncing on his heels like a teenager. His backpack was so new the tags still dangled from the zippers. When he spotted me, his grin spread wide. "Dad, perfect timing. They just called boarding." "You seem eager," I said, studying him. His left eye twitched slightly. Old training kicked in. I knew how to read nervous energy, how to tell real excitement from performance. "Why wouldn't I be?" he replied. "Father and son adventure in the last frontier." He hefted his pack awkwardly, his body straining more than it should. "When's the last time we did something like this?" I asked. On the first flight, he filled the air with endless chatter about wilderness photos and the fresh Alaskan air. Yet his phone never left his hand, like he was glued to it. I shared stories from my Navy survival days, how to read the weather, how to spot safe plants, how to move without a compass. You really know all this stuff? Ethan asked, jotting notes on a napkin. 22 years in the service will do that. Teaches you to be ready for anything. For a moment, I saw something cross his face. Calculation, not admiration. During the layover, his restlessness grew. He excused himself 3 different times, each bathroom break lasting nearly 20 minutes. I sat by the terminal window, watching the planes move against a slate-gray sky, Alaska pulling closer. The final flight carried us over mountains that looked like jagged teeth piercing the horizon. Ethan pressed his face to the window, pretending to admire the view, but his reflection in the glass showed tension rather than wonder. Fairbanks greeted us with air sharp as glass and the clean scent of snow. At the rental counter, everything was efficient. Toyota 4Runner, chains for the icy roads, extra insurance. I signed the forms while Ethan loaded gear, wincing and favoring his right shoulder like it ached. Outdoor supply store next, he said, checking his phone yet again. Ethan claimed we needed a few extras before heading out. At Frontier Supply Co., he piled items onto the counter that went far beyond basic camping needs: industrial-strength flashlights, multiple bundles of rope, and more emergency flares than seemed reasonable. The clerk, an older guy with deep lines in his face and scars that looked like they came from frostbite, raised an eyebrow. "Planning to get yourselves lost out there?" "Just want to be prepared," Ethan answered too quickly. Once we were back on the road, Highway 3 stretched ahead like a long strip of gray laid across endless forest. On either side, mountains climbed toward the clouds, their peaks catching the last orange glow of daylight. Signs along the way warned of moose crossings and icy roads. "Beautiful country," I said, hoping to break the silence that had settled between us. "Yeah," Ethan replied, his voice carrying a strange kind of satisfaction. "Really isolated." We pulled into Talkeetna for gas as darkness rolled in. While I pumped the tank full, Ethan drifted toward the convenience store. Through the glass windows, bathed in fluorescent light, I saw him pull out his phone. His posture changed, shoulders hunched, voice low, quick and urgent. When he came back, I asked lightly, "Everything good? I saw you making a call." "Just checking the weather for tomorrow," he said, eyes sliding away from mine. "Storm system moving in, but it should clear by morning." The lie rolled too easily off his tongue. I had already checked the forecast, 3 days of clear skies. As we merged back onto the highway, that old familiar unease stirred in me, the kind of instinct that had kept me alive overseas. Something was wrong. I just couldn't put my finger on it yet. 40 miles later, the moment still nagged at me. "So, what did the Weather Service actually say?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. Ethan's hand tightened on the door handle. Maybe some light flurries. Nothing big. The evasion only confirmed my suspicions, but I forced a smile. Good thing we packed layers. Soon the wooden signs for Denali came into view, marking the park's entrance. Cabins sat scattered among towering spruce trees, their roofs capped with snow. The visitor center buzzed with activity, even in March. Unlike the summer tourists, the folks here were either locals or serious outdoorsmen. Our motel, the North Star Lodge, looked exactly like the glossy brochure Ethan had shown me. Rustic log buildings with names carved above each door: Grizzly Den, Caribou Creek. At check-in, a young clerk with toughened hands handled our registration while Ethan studied trail maps posted on the wall. "First time in Denali?" she asked. "For him, yes," I said, nodding at Ethan. "I've been through Alaska before, military training exercises." "What trails are you looking at?" she asked. Before I could reply, Ethan jumped in. "Teclunica River backcountry route. We want the full wilderness experience." The clerk's expression changed, concern flashing in her eyes. "That's advanced terrain, remote. Most visitors start with shorter nature trails." "We're experienced campers," Ethan insisted, even though his last real outdoor trip had been more than 10 years ago. That afternoon, we sat in a ranger briefing room that smelled of coffee and pine. Ranger Emily Foster, tall, confident, with a no-nonsense posture that screamed authority, spread a detailed map across the table. The walls around us were covered in topographical charts and photos of wildlife. "Gentlemen, let's be clear about what you're signing up for," she began. "The Teclunica River route takes you 25 miles from the nearest ranger station. No cell service, no other campers this time of year." She pointed to several red marks on the map. We've tracked grizzly activity here, here, and here. Cubs were spotted last week, which means their mother is nearby. We've had wolves moving through, and moose are unpredictable right now. Spring territory disputes. Ethan leaned in, studying the danger zones with far too much interest. What about evacuation? He asked. Helicopter rescue? Weather permitting? Could be days, she answered firmly. If the weather turns, it could take longer. Her expression hardened, the look of someone who had seen too many tourists bite off more than they could chew. I need to ask, what's your actual wilderness experience? I answered truthfully, outlining my years of survival training in the Navy. Ethan mumbled something vague about camping with friends. The doubt on Ranger Foster's face said everything. Sir, with respect, this route is not suited for beginners. We have excellent guided tours and shorter hikes. We'll be fine, Ethan cut in. My father's practically an expert. After signing stacks of waivers and watching videos on how to handle bear encounters, we rented bear-proof containers and emergency locator beacons. I insisted we add a defensive rifle to the list, a Remington 870, solid and familiar in my grip. You really think that's necessary? Ethan asked, a hint of nerves in his voice. In Alaska, rule number 1 is simple, I told him. Never head into bear country unarmed. Our last stop was programming the GPS coordinates into the beacon. Ranger Foster showed me how it worked. Hold this button down for 5 seconds and it sends your location to search and rescue. But understand this, out there in the backcountry, even with a signal, help could be 12 to 18 hours away, minimum. We loaded the packs into the truck, and that old pre-mission tension crept back into my bones. Every detail about this trip whispered warning. The remote trail, Ethan's obvious lack of experience, his strange obsession with being as isolated as possible. Still sure about this route? I asked as we rolled away from the ranger station. Ethan forced a grin. Absolutely. No turning back now, right, Dad? The way he said it made me uneasy. It didn't sound like encouragement. It sounded final, like a man sealing a deal. In the rearview mirror, I watched the ranger station disappear into the trees, our last thread of civilization vanishing behind us. Suddenly, the wilderness ahead didn't feel like an adventure. It felt like a setup. The road narrowed until branches screeched against the windows, scraping like skeletal hands. My GPS showed us creeping deeper into unmarked territory, past the last cell tower, beyond the final trail sign, into a backcountry that had swallowed plenty of men before. We're officially off the grid, I muttered as the bars vanished from my phone. Ethan gave a hollow laugh. Perfect. Just us and nature. At mile marker 23, the Taclonica sign marked the end of the road. I pulled up beside 2 rotting wooden posts that looked more like grave markers than trail signs. Unloading our packs revealed the truth. Mine was balanced and efficient. Years of service had taught me how to carry weight. Ethan's bag bulged awkwardly with gear he clearly didn't know how to use. Jesus, this thing weighs a ton, he groaned, struggling with the straps. Proper packing takes practice, I said, shifting his gear around. He winced when I touched his right shoulder. You hurt yourself? Old injury, he muttered. Nothing serious. The trail cut into dense spruce forest where sunlight barely filtered through. Moss-covered logs forced us to climb, and icy creeks required careful footing. Signs of wildlife showed up almost immediately. Massive moose tracks pressed into the mud, eagles crying overhead, and the distant howl of wolves rolling across the valley. You hear that? Ethan stopped in his tracks, face pale. Wolves. Maybe 5 miles out? I said calmly, keeping pace. But I noticed his fear had nothing to do with wildlife. For a man who insisted on this route, he looked rattled by its reality. After 3 hours, we reached a clearing beside a fast-moving creek. It was the perfect site. Flat ground, clean water, clear lines of sight in every direction. Old military habits kicked in as I swept the perimeter, noting defensive spots and escape routes. Ethan collapsed on a log, breathing hard. How much farther do we go? This'll do for tonight. We'll push deeper tomorrow. Setting up camp showed just how unprepared he was. I hung the food 12 feet up a tree, set the cooking area downwind, and kept emergency gear within reach. Meanwhile, Ethan sat tangled in guy lines, tent fabric drooping around him. Dad, can you help? He asked, holding up the mess like a white flag. Teaching him how to set it up reminded me of the old days back when he actually wanted to learn. But the thought kept gnawing at me. Why force a wilderness trip when you couldn't handle basic equipment? As night settled, the firelight danced across our small clearing. I stirred a simple meal over the flames while Ethan sat unusually still, staring into the fire with an unreadable expression. The temperature fell quick. March nights in Alaska could kill a man who wasn't ready. Remember when we used to do this? I asked, trying to spark a memory. You were maybe 10. You roasted marshmallows until they caught fire. Mom was still alive then, he said quietly, his voice heavy. She loved camping, said it brought out the best in people. Ethan nodded, but his eyes stayed far away. Then he asked, "Tell me about your childhood, Dad. Before the Navy, before the shops. What was it like being poor?" The question caught me off guard. Ethan never cared about my past. Still, I found myself telling him stories I hadn't shared in decades. Growing up in Montana, working farms through the summers, every dollar earned with sweat and calloused hands. "Sounds rough," he said, though his tone felt more like calculation than sympathy. "Hard work builds character," I told him. "It teaches you the value of earning what you've got." Something flickered across his face. Resentment, maybe frustration. Then he forced a neutral tone. "Guess I'm lucky then. Got to skip all that character building." The fire popped, sparks drifting upward. Ethan kept steering the talk toward my military years, survival skills, training, how I spotted danger. I opened up more than usual, thinking maybe he was finally interested. "How do you know when someone's lying to you?" he asked suddenly. "Body language, tone, details that don't line up," I said, prodding the fire. "Why?" "Just curious. You've always been good at reading people." Later, after I banked the fire, silence fell across the clearing. Stars blanketed the sky, smiller and brighter than I'd seen since my deployments, no city glow to drown them out. For a moment, the wilderness felt untouched, almost holy. "I'll take first watch," Ethan offered. "Not tired yet." "You sure? We've got a long day tomorrow." "Yeah, I want to listen to the forest." I crawled into my tent that night, trusting Ethan to wake me for the second shift. Through the thin nylon walls, I heard him moving around the fire, logs cracking, footsteps circling, the kind of background noise that usually meant everything was fine. But as I drifted towards sleep, something gnawed at me. Ethan had never cared for quiet reflection, never once shown a taste for sitting alone with his thoughts. Why suddenly volunteer for watch? The last sound I noticed before exhaustion took over wasn't movement. It was stillness, deliberate and careful, like someone waiting, not watching. Morning light seeped through the tent fabric, pulling me awake. What I heard outside wasn't the lazy clatter of breakfast prep. It was the metallic rattle of gear being packed in a hurry. I unzipped the flap, cold air biting my lungs. Ethan stood by the truck, loading equipment with a precision he had never displayed before. Rifle, GPS, food containers, even the emergency beacon, all disappearing into the vehicle like pieces of a puzzle. "What's going on?" My voice cracked through the crisp silence. He jumped slightly, then straightened, jaw tight. "Change of plans," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "We Glossin on 3 more days," I pressed. "Why the rush?" "Storm's coming," he said flatly. It was a lie. I'd checked the forecast, clear skies. The sky above us now was pale and flawless. Old instincts flared alive inside me, instincts I thought I had left behind when I retired. My gut screamed danger. "Ethan," I said slowly, "tell me what's really happening." Something inside him broke. Years of resentment spilled out all at once, like a dam cracking wide open. His face twisted with fury. "You want to know what's happening? I'm finished. Finished with your control, your manipulation, your endless judgment. Son, I don't. Don't call me that." He spun, fists tight. "Sons don't have to beg their own father for money while he sits on millions. Sons don't get treated like employees." The venom in his tone felt like a punch to the ribs. This wasn't a moment of anger. This was something long cultivated, festering under the surface for years. "I've given you everything," I said, my voice hoarse. "You've given me nothing." His words cracked like a whip. "You kept me weak. You made me dependent. You pulled my strings with your checkbook. But not anymore. I'm taking control." A cold realization hit me. The trip itself had been a setup. "Finally catching on, Mr. Military Genius?" His laugh was hollow. "Took you long enough. Ethan, if you needed money, we could have worked something out." "I don't want your scraps anymore, Dad. I want what's mine. The shops, the assets, everything you've held over me my entire life." The air itself seemed to freeze around us. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my son's face. 22 years of love, of sacrifice shattered in the space between us. "You're planning to leave me here?" I asked. His eyes glittered with satisfaction. "That's right, 25 miles of wilderness will finally show you what dependence feels like. Maybe you'll survive, maybe you won't." "Ethan, this is grizzly country. No gear, no GPS. You're sentencing me. Should have thought about that before you made me your puppet." He slammed the truck's tailgate closed. "Either way, when you're gone, I'll have what I should have had years ago." "Please," I rasped, throat raw. "Whatever I did wrong, we can fix it. Don't do this." For an instant, something flickered across his face. Hesitation, maybe even the ghost of affection. But it died as quickly as it came. "Goodbye, Dad." He climbed into the driver's seat. "Try not to meet the grizzlies too soon. I want you to have some time to think about what you created." The engine roared to life. I stepped forward, desperate to stop him, but the truck lurched back, tires spitting gravel. Through the windshield, I caught his eyes one last time. Cold, calculating, empty. "Ethan!" My shout echoed against the mountains as the vehicle disappeared around the bend. The rumble of the engine faded into silence, leaving me alone on the dirt road 25 miles from the nearest human soul. Dust hung in the air, slowly settling around my boots. The quiet that followed was absolute. No voices, no machines, only the wind whispering through the spruce and the cry of a hawk overhead. I stood there motionless, trying to absorb the weight of it. My son, the boy I had raised and carried and shielded, had just left me to die. The dust hadn't even cleared when training took over. Shock was a luxury, not here, not in grizzly country, 25 miles from safety. I forced my breathing steady, letting discipline override despair. First rule of survival, assess your resources. I patted down my pockets, wallet, house keys, a small folding knife I'd forgotten about. No food, no water, no map, no beacon, only the clothes on my back. Second rule, evaluate the environment. It was March in Alaska. Nights would drop below freezing. The land around me was nothing but endless spruce forest. No signs, no trails, no other soul. Ranger Foster's warnings kept echoing in my mind. Grizzlies spotted nearby, wolf packs roaming, weather that could turn in an instant. Third rule of survival, set your priorities. Shelter, water, signaling, navigation, in that order. I tilted my head back, reading the sun's position. East would drag me deeper into the wilderness. West, if I was lucky, would eventually bring me back toward the main park road. I didn't know how far, but it was my only real shot. Bits and pieces of the ranger's topographical briefing came back to me. Rivers flowed northwest toward the park boundary. Following water usually meant life and sometimes rescue. Either way, standing still wasn't an option. Stillness was death. So I started west, keeping to the faint tire ruts Ethan's truck had left behind. Within 100 yards, the tracks split from a narrow game trail that cut through the brush. I chose the game path. Animals always led to water, and water meant survival. Every step was a battle. At 60, my knees screamed with each uneven rise, and I wasn't the hardened soldier I'd once been. But anger kept me moving. Anger at Ethan's betrayal, anger at my own blindness, anger at the years I had wasted turning my son into the kind of man who could do this. The forest swallowed me whole. Towering spruce shut out the sky, throwing everything into a dim half-light even though it was midday. I snapped branches behind me as I walked. Crude trail markers for any rescuer who might stumble this way, though the chances of that happening felt close to none. Evidence of bears was everywhere, claw scars on bark, paw prints deep in the mud, scat so fresh the smell lingered. I made noise as I moved, clapping, speaking aloud, anything to warn them off. Ranger Foster's voice echoed in my head. Never surprise a grizzly. The irony wasn't lost on me. My own son had left me in a situation where predators might be the least of my concerns. Hours passed. My throat turned dry, then cracked with thirst. The game trail wound endlessly, sometimes disappearing altogether, forcing me to backtrack and search for it again. Fatigue burned through my legs, but I couldn't stop. Stopping meant darkness. Darkness meant death. Then I froze. A sound cut through the wilderness, not animal, not wind, mechanical, rhythmic, definitely man-made. Engines, more than one. I held still, ears straining. The noise came from the north, maybe half a mile. All-terrain vehicles? Motorcycles? Whoever it was, they were moving slow, deliberate. Hope shot through me like a spark. Hunters. Rangers. Maybe even search and rescue. I veered north, forcing my way through brush that clawed at my clothes. The engines grew louder, closer. The trees began to thin. At maybe 200 yards, I could see flashes of open space between trunks. I pushed harder, abandoning stealth for speed, branches tearing at my face as I stumbled toward salvation. Breaking into the clearing, I saw them, 4 riders on ATVs, engines idling as they unpacked lunch. They froze when I stumbled out of the tree line, scratched, wild-eyed, clearly out of place. The leader, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a weathered face and eyes that measured everything, cut his engine and walked toward me. His voice was steady, professional. "Sir, what happened? Why are you out here alone?" My words came out rough, hoarse from thirst. "My son, he left me. Took all the gear, the truck, everything, left me here to die." The man's expression shifted, disbelief hardening into anger. "Out here? That's not abandonment, that's attempted murder." "I'm Robert Miller," I said, breath shaking. "My son Ethan brought me on this trip, then I struggled to get the words out. He just drove off with everything." "Jesus," the man muttered. He yanked off his helmet, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes. "Jack Lawson, used to be a ranger here. These are my people. We're running a backcountry tour." The others gathered around, their faces showing the same outrage only true outdoorsmen feel when they hear about deliberate betrayal in the wild. A woman in her 30s pressed a water bottle into my hand. I drained it like a man just pulled from the desert. "How long ago?" Jack asked, voice clipped now, all business. "This morning. 5 hours, maybe," I answered. Jack exchanged a look with his group. "We need to move. Radio signal's poor here, but at higher ground we can reach the station." He glanced at his GPS, then back at me. "If your son's stuck to the main road, he's facing a 6-hour drive minimum to Fairbanks. But I know a ranger shortcut, old service trail, cuts right through the backcountry." My pulse jumped. "You mean I could get back before him?" "Easily," Jack said without hesitation. "The question is, do you want to go straight to law enforcement, or—" His eyes narrowed as he studied me. "Or do you have something else in mind?" Something inside me hardened. Fear drained away, replaced with something deathsmiller. Ethan had calculated my death, counted on my helplessness. He thought I was finished. But he'd forgotten one thing. I wasn't finished. Not yet. Ethan had miscalculated in one big way. He underestimated 2 things: the tight bond of the wilderness community and my own instinct to survive. "I want to get back to the lodge first," I told Jack carefully, "before I decide what to do about the police." He gave me a knowing nod. "Climb on. We'll take the ranger trail. Your son won't even know you're ahead of him." The ATV roared to life, and as we tore through narrow hidden tracks, I saw a side of Denali that most tourists never would. Service trails only rangers and seasoned guides knew about, a secret web through the forest, carved for emergencies and rescues. Jack rode with the ease of a man who'd traveled them for years. "I worked 15 years as a ranger here," he shouted over the engine noise. "I've seen plenty of stupid choices, but leaving someone on purpose? That's not stupidity. That's a crime." We powered across creeks, crawled up steep ridges, and even had to get off the ATVs to maneuver around fallen trees. Despite the rough terrain, Jack pushed hard, and soon enough we broke out onto paved road, well ahead of his estimate. The North Star Lodge came into view, its log cabins and glowing windows looking almost unreal after what I'd endured in the wilderness. As we rolled into the parking lot, I scanned for our rental truck. It wasn't there. "Your son's still driving," Jack said. "You've got a window to prepare your welcome." His companions gathered close, offering numbers and emails. Each promised to stand as a witness if this ever went before a judge. Jack pressed a card into my hand with his personal cell written in bold ink. "Call when you're ready for the authorities," he said. His eyes narrowed. "Because what your son did, there need to be consequences." Before leaving, he paused. "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly are you planning to do when he comes back?" I looked toward our room where the rest of our belongings waited. My jacket pocket felt heavy with the legal documents I'd carried since Portland. Ethan had spent years scheming my downfall. Now it was my turn. "I'm going to give him exactly what he's been chasing," I said quietly, "just not in the way he expects." Inside the motel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. Jack's card lay on the nightstand, next to the folded papers that suddenly felt more dangerous than any weapon. 3 weeks earlier, On a wave of disappointment in Ethan, I had rewritten my will. At the time, it felt like punishment. Now it looked like preparation. I spread the documents across the desk, reading over each line with care. Ethan would inherit nothing. Every cent, every asset, every shop redirected to charities, veterans groups, and a scholarship fund in Eleanor's name. The irony stung sweet. Ethan had tried to kill me for an inheritance that no longer existed. But paper alone wasn't enough. I needed proof. Evidence. Words that would follow Ethan the rest of his life. I dialed Jack. He answered immediately. Robert, you settled in? I need your help. When Ethan shows up, I want everything captured. His words, his face, all of it. You planning to confront him before the police? I'm planning to give him the illusion he's finally won. Let him believe for one moment he's inheriting everything, and then let him realize exactly what he's done to himself. There was a pause. Then Jack said, That's strategic. You want me there as witness? If you're willing. And bring that camera you had earlier. Ethan's going to say things that deserve to be preserved for a jury. What time? I thought through Ethan's route. Main Park Road to the George Parks Highway, plus his habit of stopping for food and gas. Between 9 and 10, he'll be tired, cocky, and expecting to walk into an empty room. Instead, he'll find his victim alive and ready. Very well prepared, Jack said. We had Glosson he would arrive at 8:30. After hanging up, I called my attorney in Portland. The conversation was short but critical. By tomorrow morning, my new will would be on file, permanent, beyond Ethan's reach. Next, I spoke to the motel clerk, an elderly woman with eyes sharp from years of watching other people's dramas play out in Alaska. She didn't ask why I wanted an adjoining room, just slid the key across the counter. The evening at the counter. The evening unfolded with eerie calm. I showered, changed into fresh clothes, and laid out the room like a stage. The legal documents spread across the desk where Ethan's eyes would land the second he entered. Jack would be stationed in the next room, camera ready through the connecting door. My phone sat on the nightstand with 9111 already pulled up, one tap away. Military training had taught me this much. Control the environment, eliminate variables. Tonight, Ethan was stepping into my arena. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd spent months plotting my death out in the wilderness. Now I was arranging his ruin back here in civilization. The difference was simple. My plan left him alive, forced to face the full weight of his actions. At 8:15, Jack knocked. When I let him in, he carried professional camera gear and the somber face of a man who'd seen too many tragedies in these woods. He set up quickly, testing angles, checking audio, making sure nothing would be missed. Every word, every movement. This room's covered, he said quietly. When he walks through that door, you'll have every second on record, Jack assured me. Once this goes to the authorities, there's no mistaking it. Attempted murder in the first degree. Out here, abandoning someone in the wilderness is treated like pulling a trigger. His words landed heavy. It's basically a death sentence with extra steps. Between your statement, mine, and whatever he says tonight, he's looking at years, decades, behind bars. I gave a slow nod, and for the first time since Alaska swallowed me whole, I felt something like justice tighten in my chest. Cold, steady. Now, all there was left to do was wait. Night pressed in against the motel walls, the windows reflecting only blackness and the faint shimmer of neon from the lodge sign. Out on the road, headlights would soon appear, carrying my son into a reckoning he never imagined he'd face. The clock read 8:47, any minute now. Headlights cut across the lot, and then came the sound, the familiar growl of our rental truck pulling in. Ethan was back from his failed execution attempt, now probably rehearsing the role of grief-stricken son ready to report his father's tragic disappearance. I placed myself in the chair facing the door, the stack of legal documents spread neatly on the desk where he couldn't miss them. Through the thin wall, I could hear Jack shifting his camera equipment, checking angles. Everything was ready. The key scraped the lock, slipped, then caught on the second try. The door swung open. Ethan stepped inside with the careful tread of someone expecting emptiness. The light hit him square in the face. Recognition struck like a punch. "Dad?" His voice cracked, strangled in disbelief. "Hello, son," I said evenly. "How was the drive?" Shock rolled across his face in waves. Confusion, terror, denial. How are you here? How did you get back? Turns out I'm harder to kill than you planned for. His knees bent slightly as if the ground itself betrayed him. He grabbed the doorframe, eyes darting like a cornered animal. I don't understand. I left you. 25 miles out. No food, no water, nothing. Yes, I said calmly. I remember. And I remember your parting words, too. Go meet the Grizzlies. Very poetic for last words, don't you think? Dad, wait, you don't understand. Oh, I understand better than you think. My voice stayed level, almost conversational. You brought me here to kill me. You researched the most remote patch of land you could find. You mapped out the logistics. You practiced your tragic son routine for when the Rangers found my body. You spent months planning my death. Ethan's lips moved, but nothing came out. Sweat beaded at his hairline despite the cool night air. The problem with your plan, I went on, standing slowly, is that you underestimated one thing. Out here, people actually help each other survive. You chose wilderness as your weapon, and it turned on you. He swallowed hard, desperation flashing in his eyes. If this is about money, it was always about money for you. That's what I finally see. Every call, every visit, every fake father-son bonding trip, it was all just accounting, measured against what I was worth. I reached over and picked up the stack of papers from the desk. Ethan's eyes locked on them like they were a weapon. You want to know something? I said. 3 weeks ago, after our last fight, I changed my will. At the time, I called it a disappointment tax. What do you mean changed? I mean, you get nothing. Not the shops, not the accounts, not the house your mother loved. Every cent goes to veterans charities, wildlife conservation, scholarships in Eleanor's name. All of it. The color drained from his face. You can't do that. I'm your son. You were my son. This morning you became something else entirely. A man who plotted his father's death for a payday. Dad, please, listen to me. I listened this morning while you explained how my so-called control ruined your life. I listened when you told me I deserved to die alone in bear country. I've heard enough. His composure cracked like thin ice. You self-righteous bastard. You did this. You built me this way. Every time you dangled money, every time you pulled the strings, every time you judged me while keeping me dependent. This is your creation. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not grief, but a strange, steady calm. You're right, I said. I did create this. I bought your affection. I mistook providing for parenting. I built your dependence and called it love. That's my failure as a father. Then change it back, Ethan pleaded, his voice breaking. Change the will. Fix this. It was filed this afternoon, I told him. It's finished. I stepped toward the door, moving past him. Somehow he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, diminished, like the weight of his own choices had finally caved him in. But you're wrong about one thing, I added, pausing. I didn't create your decision to commit murder. That was yours, and yours alone. Where are you going? His voice cracked. To call the police, I said without turning. Attempted murder is still a felony, even when it fails. Dad, wait. I stopped in the doorway. Goodbye, Ethan. In a strange way, you've given me exactly what I needed. Clarity. Now I know who you really are. The last image burned into my memory was my son collapsing into the chair I just vacated, staring down at the stack of documents, his supposed inheritance turned into the proof of everything he'd lost. The fluorescent lights of the Fairbanks Police Department buzzed overhead as Detective Laura Ramirez spread the evidence across a cold metal table. Jack's digital recordings, my sworn statement. Ethan's own confession from the motel, caught on tape. Mr. Miller, she said, scrolling through the audio files, I've worked wilderness crimes for 8 years. This is the most premeditated case of attempted murder I've seen. She clicked play on a recording. Ethan's voice filled the room, his words damning in their detail. Your son left nothing to interpretation, Ramirez said. The district attorney will file charges in the morning. Attempted murder, reckless endangerment, conspiracy to commit fraud regarding your estate. Out here, abandoning a man in the wild is treated as what it is, a death sentence. Through the window, I could see Ethan in handcuffs being processed at booking. One night in jail had stripped away the last of his swagger. No charm, no manipulation, just a 28-year-old man facing the weight of what he'd done. Jack sat beside me, steady and dependable, ready to give his statement. What kind of sentence are we looking at? I asked. 15 to 25 years, Ramirez replied. Depends on how the plea plays out, but make no mistake, he's not walking away from this. I watched Ethan through the glass. Oddly enough, I didn't feel triumph. No victory, no revenge. Just the final, natural end of a road he'd chosen long ago. "Will you be heading back to Portland right away?" she asked. "Tomorrow," I said. "I've got to see my attorney first, tie off some estate matters." She gave me a knowing nod. "Making sure your will is secured?" "And more than that," I said. I gathered my jacket and the folders. "I'm setting up a foundation in Eleanor's name. If Ethan wanted my wealth to destroy, then it'll go to people who can actually use it." Jack and I stepped out into Fairbanks's morning air, sharp and clean. Traffic hummed slow and steady, Alaskan practical. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now I go back to Portland," I said. "Back to the shops, back to figuring out what kind of man I want to be with the time I've got left." I looked up at the Kenai Mountains, rising hard and clean against the skyline. Funny thing, surviving your own child's attempt on your life clears your priorities right up. "You planning to visit him during trial?" Jack asked carefully. The question cut deeper than I expected. I thought about it. Really thought. Then I shook my head. "No, the son I raised died in those woods yesterday morning. What's left isn't my son anymore." At his truck, Jack handed me a business card. "If you ever want to come back to Alaska for the right reasons, fishing, camping, actually enjoying the land, call me. First trip's on me." "Why would you do that?" I asked. He gave me a half smile. "Because you lived through something designed to kill you, and instead of letting it harden you, you're choosing to turn it into something good. That deserves support." I shook his hand, real gratitude warming a place inside me I thought Ethan had killed off for good. "Thank you for everything. Thank the wilderness community," he said simply. "Up here, we look out for each other." As Jack drove away, I pulled out my phone. My attorney's number was already on the screen. There was work to do, foundations to establish, scholarships to fund, a lifetime of enabling to undo. Ethan had dragged me to Alaska to die for money. Instead, I'd found a reason to live for something bigger than myself. In trying to destroy me, my son had given me the one thing he never expected: purpose. 4 days after I got back to Portland, an envelope arrived from the county jail. Ethan's handwriting scrawled across the front. Inside were 5 pages of the same old game, manipulation dressed up as remorse. He promised he'd changed, begged me to reconsider the will, swore prison would ruin his life forever. I read it once, then I fed the whole stack straight into the shredder. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. And as always, thank you for watching.